Welcome to the Chicago Home Partner Podcast. I am your host, Amanda McMillan. Join us each episode as I have experts in all of the different fields of Chicago real estate as we unpack and digest what's actually happening out there. Okay, this woman needs no introduction or reintroduction for those that remember her from before. Miss Connie Dornan is back with us again. Connie, the lead of the Connie Dornan Group, has been at this real estate game up in the northern suburbs for 2 decades now. Two decades. She's been rocking it up there. And more importantly, she's been taking amazing care of our clients when they go that way. Why has Connie been the one that I choose? Because essentially, she thinks like I do. She acts like I do. She works like I do. There's a lot of late night emails between the two of us, but we come in a little bit of a different presentation. She curses way more than I do. Anyways, Connie, thank you so much for coming back.
Thank you very much for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here and always good to see you.
It's my honor to have you here. You know, I think the absolute world of you.
And, you know, for those of you out there that are watching this, Amanda is my city twin. We're a little bit different. I'm prettier. Just joking.
Younger too, right?
I'm younger as well. Anyway, she is absolutely wonderful. And she's been taking care of my clients that have been doing the reverse commute back into the city.
Fantastic. Well, I'm going to jump in because we have some major topics to hit in on here.
Let's take it.
It's been a wild ride, right? We can not only last year, but the last few years have been a wild ride. We are looking eyes full face forward at 2024. Talk to me about what your expectations are. I know this is a big question. What are your expectations for the North Suburban markets in 2024?
I think it's going to be great. And I'll tell you why. It's going to be great for sellers. Buyers, they're going to continue to be frustrated by what's going on. We don't have a lot of inventory. Homes are being sold well before they hit the market, even before they even hit the private listing network. So for sellers, they're going to still be getting top dollar, looking at probably home appreciation of at least anywhere from 1% to 3%, depending on which location within each suburb and the type of product that it is.
Okay, so you touched on a lot of really big, great topics in there. Let's unpack some of those. First and foremost, how competitive do we think the spring market is going to be?
Very competitive.
Very competitive.
There's just no homes out there to sell. People are sitting with their golden handcuffs at home. They don't want to sell their homes. And the ones that do want to sell because of a life change, whatever that may be, are coming on the market. And there's a lot of buyers for them. But this time around, the buyers are a little bit different. They're not as crazy as they were a few years ago when COVID hit and they were putting obnoxious over-the-top offers. They've scaled that back, but it's still, they're coming in with multiple offers and homes are still selling for significantly more than they would have, say, in 2016 or 2017.
It sounds like to me from what you're saying, the desperation aspect is gone. Maybe not so desperate, but still you got to be ready to play ball when we play.
Absolutely. You must be prepared. You have to have that pre-approval letter. You have to listen to your real estate broker on how to position the best possible offer.
No, and that's fantastic. And you used a term. I called you out on it last time. I'm going to call you out on it again because this is not that type of show. But what is a golden handcuff?
Well, I thought it was that type of show.
That's the next season.
Oh, I see. Got it.
Wait for the trailer.
I can't wait. Okay, so the golden handcuffs are when 85% of the American population out there that has a mortgage are sitting on mortgages that are between anywhere from 2% to 4%. And they don't want to move because interest rates currently are about 6.75 to 7%. They're hovering, they're going back and forth with that. So they don't want to move. They want to move, but they don't want to lose this awesome interest rate that they have, thus the golden handcuffs.
So with all of the predictions and projections that we're expecting our rates to go down this year, how do you think that's really going to impact things?
I think it's going to get a lot of people to unshackle those golden handcuffs and make those moves that they need to make because of their own personal situation. There are going to be more homes that are going to hit the market and more buyers out there too, competing for those homes.
So I think you made a great point there that a lot of people would probably miss. I think we all agree we are expecting a little bit more inventory. Right?
Yes. Yeah. Especially in the first and second quarter of this year.
Yep.
But we most likely will drop by third into fourth quarter. But so will the interest rates.
So We'll get a little bit more in inventory, which really feels like winning. But along with that inventory is going to come more demand because you have these people, A, that are releasing some of the inventory.
Exactly.
And B, the other people that have been waiting and waiting and waiting for those interest rates to go down.
That's correct.
Yeah. So you mentioned there, and I think that I'm going to lead into this next part of it, a little hefty up front, and then we're going to see the market teeter off a little bit. Does that expectation tie in at all with the election? Or if not, how do you think the election is going to really hit the market?
So in my experience, in any given year for election years, the election year themselves, and when you've got, you don't know who's going to be running. So there's all the, the different campaigns going on. So that brings a lot of uncertainty. With the uncertainty, some people are not going to be making a move this year, or maybe they're not going to be as optimistic about that move this year as they are going to be optimistic regardless of who they supported. They'll be more optimistic next year because they will know what to expect. Yeah. Right? Every candidate out there will have a different policy. Those policies might affect an individual in a different way. And ultimately, it affects a homeowner. That'll affect the interest rates, their job, taxation, etc.
So it's interesting. I'm going to ask you a question, and then I'll give you my insight as well. But I'm going to ask you a question that I feel like I get asked all the time. And in my opinion, it's this question that has a bigger impact on the market than the actual election. I'd say the last 2 to 3 months before the election, the number one question I will get is, how will whichever winner impact the real estate market? Is that something that you guys get as well?
We do. And the short answer to that is it doesn't. There is no impact. The only impact is what's happening in your local market economy. Yep. What is this level of supply and demand, and where are the interest rates? That's what the impact is. Whenever the election finishes and, the president gets elected, there's a sense of optimism, regardless of who wins and what side you're on, because the elections are so volatile. Everyone's glad that they're over.
Relief.
There's relief. They know what to expect. And we go back into the business of doing what we're doing for the next 3 years till the same cycle happens again in the 4th year.
I agree with you 1,000%. In fact, when people ask me that question, I say nobody ever likes the answer. Yeah. There is absolutely no impact on our real estate market immediately based on the results. The impact is those 2 to 3 months up front when everyone is hesitant to do something because they're so worried that there's going to be an impact.
So what I think will affect the real estate market for the luxury home buyer, it's the effect of the stock market after an election. And there's always like an upswing or a downswing, depending on what Wall Street feels about the new candidate and its economic policies. And that is going to have an effect on the luxury market. It doesn't really impact the entry-level market. And at the end of the day, we're talking about these national numbers, but you really have to look at the local real estate market. That is what's more important.
No, that's a great point. And in fact, we were actually just talking about all of this politics, which we talk about it, but we don't talk about it. We were talking back about the 2016 election, which after the election, which was a big surprise, we saw the stock market really got rocked. And then we had a little bit of what I call holding breath as we saw how the dust settled. But for the most part, I think we're very aligned that the impact of the election on the market will be more leading up to it. The more contentious it is, the tougher it'll be. But then as we get past it, that relief, thank God, and we'll move on and we'll chug along with our normal markets. Okay, we touched on it a little bit before, but I want to come back to this because I really, truly believe that this is going to be a bit of a definition of our year. How do you see those interest rates in 2024 impacting the market on your end?
We have had a shortage of inventory in the North Shore for quite a long time. It started in 2017, pre-pandemic, and it got exponentially worse during the pandemic. And now it's still pretty bad because of the golden handcuffs, right? And everyone's sitting on very low mortgages and they don't want to sell. So with the interest rates going down, and they will go down, I don't expect them to go down to 4s or even into the 5s. I think we might hit something like 6.25% at some point this year. I'm fairly confident of that. And I think They've tackled inflation. I think that's going well. I think like the big hairball out there is what's happening in the global arena with the various wars. And I think that has contributed to some of the uncertainty to the consumer. It's given them some anxiety. But I think that'll resolve itself as they always do, hopefully sooner rather than later. And we'll see in people focusing more on themselves and taking to the next step of where they want to move.
No, I think that's, a great point, and one that we obviously have to acknowledge. The world is heavy, right? There is a lot going on out there. 2024 is going to carry a lot of that burden and a lot of that weight that we've been bringing forth from these previous years as we kind of get sucker punched as we move forward. So yes, I think there's a lot of optimism in what we're stepping into, but we can't forget about kind of what we're putting on our backs and carrying through it.
Absolutely. I mean, what we have to take a look at is when we're just looking at the U.S. and U.S. economic arena here, we've got low unemployment. Interest rates are still historically low in the last 50 years. The average in the last 50 years is 7.75%, and we're still below those averages. There are more I think the numbers are, correct me if I'm wrong, it's over 30% of the American population that own their homes outright, cash. So financially, Americans are in a pretty good spot. It's just what's happening outside of America, which is causing some uncertainty in how what's happening there is going to affect our policies.
So true. Anyways, on that note, I'm going to pivot us a little bit.
Sure.
Because there's this other topic that I am dying to talk to you about.
Okay.
We have so many people, especially my clients in the city, have so many people that say, you know what? I'm ready for my next chapter. I'm ready for the suburbs. I have no idea which one or how to go, what to go. I just don't understand them enough. I wanted to talk to you and I wanted to hear your thoughts when somebody's considering a move to your side of the suburbs. What are the things that they should be considering, and what are the things that they maybe don't know that they should be considering?
Well, first of all, Amanda, you got to call me, and you do want to move to the North Shore. So the things that they want to consider are what's important to you. Schools, where's your commute? What type of house do you want? Do you want vintage or do you want new construction? Do you want a gated community or do you want something?
Wait, you have gated communities?
We do have gated communities. I know. It works for some.
Absolutely.
What are you going to do? So do you want an active family-oriented community with lots of kids or do you want something more with retirees? So depending on what those answers are, that's where I fall in and tell you, okay, here are your options. And we can take a look at this area or this area. For example, for a gated community, maybe you want to consider Meadow Ridge or Royal Ridge. Those are two gated communities in Northbrook, or let's say that you really want a tutor. Well, you're going to find more tutors in, for example, in north part of Evanston or even in Glencoe. Lots of tutors there. Far more so than you're going to find a tutor in Glenview or Northbrook.
That's a great point because I always explain that to my clients in the city, right? If you want to be in a courtyard building, you're not going to be in certain areas. And if you want to be in a high rise, you're not going to be 2 miles from the lake just because that's how the zoning works out and that's how the inventory is actually built.
Exactly.
Now, kind of on that note, and the other thing that you probably didn't mention, but probably is a pretty big driver in that is price.
Well, price is no matter where you're looking at, cities, suburbs,
Right.
farmland, price is always a factor.
Yes.
So for example, if you're telling me that you want to spend 1.5 million or 1.8 million on a new construction house, at least 4,000 square feet, well, that's most likely not going to be Glencoe, Winnetka, Kenilworth.
Sure.
So we might find something in certain areas of Wilmette. We'll definitely find something in Glenview or Northbrook at that price point.
No, absolutely. And that's just the nature of location.
Exactly.
In terms of the clients coming out of the city, because that's so many of the people that hopefully are watching right now, as they transition to your neck of the woods, what are some of the real popular places that they're going?
Amanda, that's a tough question to answer because everyone is unique. I can't say that there's one area that is far more popular than another one. Okay. Not in the same way that it is in the city. So as I was coming down here today and going through Ravenswood, I remember a time when Ravenswood was like the hottest area to be in, or Bucktown or Wicker Park. It's not the same thing in the suburbs. Like we don't have, and you're like, oh, you've got to buy a house in the Highlands, or you have to buy a house on the tree streets. Well, those areas have always been popular since I was a child. So it's just a matter of what do you really want? And of course, in that question, we're going to go into location value. So how important is location value to you? So, and that will also determine where you're going to live. If location value is not important, well, maybe we're going to look for the product that you like, for the lifestyle that you want in an area that maybe not most buyers are looking for,
Sure.
right? So you'll get a better value there than you will have, let's say, in downtown Wilmette, or the McKenzie School District.
I gotcha. I still think she totally punted on my question, though. So I'm going to call you back to it.
All right.
Top
Sorry.
3 suburbs that you represent where you saw city buyers go to last year.
Wilmette, Winnetka, and Glenview.
Okay.
In that order.
Okay. I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
I wasn't going to let you get off that easy. What do you think? Here's another one kind of along these. And really what I want to do is I want to open people's awareness for suburbs that maybe they don't know. If you had to pick a couple of the northern suburbs that really are, as I like to say, Midwestern value, more bang for your buck, a little bit more value driven, what would come to mind right off the top?
That would be outside of the North Shore.
Okay.
So those areas would be Arlington Heights, Barrington. You get far out.
Horse country.
Right. Libertyville and portions of Lake Forest.
Okay. No, that's fantastic. And I think that opens minds, because I do think that there's a lot of consumers that just get, as the prices have gone up, get a little concerned if they can afford the house that they want in the areas that they want to.
But you also have to consider another thing. So let's say that the client wants to buy a new construction home for, let's say, $1.2 million, as an example. So maybe in 2014, 2015, you can buy a new construction home for $1.2, $1.3 million in Glenview, Northbrook. Now you really can't.
Sure.
So it's very, very, unless you get like something that's like 2,500 square feet. So now they get pushed out to Arlington Heights, and Arlington Heights is a fantastic suburb. It's beautiful. Downtown area is great. Wonderful school systems. But now those prices have gone up. 1.2, 1.3 million is a drop in the bucket in the North Shore in how many homes will sell at that price point, whereas in Arlington Heights, it's not. You are really at the top of the market there at that price point.
Okay.
So it depends what you want.
Well, I'm going to ask one last question on this topic, and I know you're going to try and punt it a little bit because you already told me there's no such thing as a hot neighborhood. But as you look to this year, is there any neighborhood that you really think is going to get some strong attention?
I think portions of Highland Park. I think Highland Park was a little quiet for a little while. They had some of their own little carfuncles going on with their school administration, but I think that's all settled now. And I think Highland Park is really going to come up shining a bit more than it has in the last few years. I mean, don't get me wrong. It's done well. There's no doubt.
For certain. But I think it's going to kind of step back into the limelight a little bit more.
Exactly.
Well, Connie, I can't thank you enough for making the schlep down here.
You're welcome.
Dealing with the traffic, the parking, everything else here that we deal with in the city.
Rain.
And the rain. Yeah. But we've really appreciated it. I love that you'll share your knowledge with our clients. I call them ours because so many of them go back and forth between us.
Exactly.
It is always just a treasure to have you.
And I would only schlep in traffic and the rain just for you.
Well, this is a treat. It's not often that we get to talk to people that are actually knee deep in what's happening behind our industry. Over the last couple of years, we've really been dealing with some issues with new construction, and we have the source with us to dive into this topic today. We have the one, the only, Zev Salomon, the principal of ZSD Development. Zev has been the mastermind and coordinator behind so many of the great developments in our city on a multitude of different scales. And he has been in every aspect of new construction. Zev, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
We know that over the last few years, we've seen probably some more roller coasters than typical. I mean, it's always a wild ride. Let's not say that. You've been at this for over 2 decades. I've been at this for over 2 decades. It's always a wild ride. The last few years have been especially the kind that we need to buckle up for. We know that inventory has been such an issue in that. And in my opinion, so much of that bottleneck is coming from a lack of new construction. What do you see as some of the challenges in new constructions now and what they've been in the last few years?
There's so many different challenges, and you can't look at either this year, last year, even pandemic or pre-pandemic. So since the Great Recession, since 2011, when the world kind of started to thaw, there's been no significant new construction product built. And the reason is that there's been such a fundamental shift in the marketplace away from condo specifically, and maybe even more specifically away from house as investment. Pre-recession, everybody, including myself, my first purchase, looked at their house as an investment. How much money am I going to make on this acquisition, and how fast can I realize that? Post 2008, that doesn't exist for the most part. I could probably count on my two hands the number of pure investors I've sold to in the last 13, 14 years. It's gone from huge to functionally zero. So with that has been a shift away from early first-time buyer homes, studios, 1s and 2s, to only family-sized homes, 3 bedrooms, and in my case, more specific in the last couple of years, 4 bedrooms and 5 bedrooms. So what we've affectionately called single-family alternatives. So you have this dramatic shift over the last decade. Then you layer into that the pandemic. Then you layer into that inflation, and you just have a world that has so many headwinds when it comes to big scale new construction development. And that's really, I think, what you're talking about, is that you've got thousands of new construction apartments being delivered and tops a couple hundred new construction developer-sized for sale projects. Now, that's taking out of the market the 2 flats and the 3 flats, which kind of are here or there, proliferate. But the stuff at scale it's fundamentally just disappeared in the last decade.
No, I think you're absolutely right. What we saw so much in the city is that there was this huge push to what seemed like a safer environment for builders to build rental buildings, right? We had a limited supply of actual rental buildings. All the developers jumped onto that train and said, hey, this feels a little safer. I don't necessarily need to be so pre-sold to get this done, and did that. So I hear what you're saying in the sense that even by the time we got to the pandemic, we had new construction inventory issues that we were still dealing with, which just exacerbated since then.
Right. When you then look at the pandemic issues that came up, what did people want? Where did they want to be? The need or the desire for outside space, the need for home office, some of the other things that most of the existing condo, urban product, multifamily product didn't address. You can't turn on a dime. You can't say, okay, we've got this brand new need in the market. Let's design the next project that way and sell it and have it delivered in time where it makes a meaningful difference. The lifespan of a development in my world is 3 years. And so the pandemic didn't last 3 years. So if you thought about where were you the day before the pandemic started and where were you the day after, and you said, okay, I'm going to pivot in the middle of that, there's not enough time to pivot and finish and deliver before the cycle has already started to change. I don't think the cycle's changed post-pandemic from what happened during the pandemic, but it just doesn't happen on a dime.
No, and I think that's a great point, because I think a lot of people miss that, in the sense that your ability to pivot in real time, you're handcuffed. Not that you don't necessarily want to, but you are facing the city, the code, the inspectors, and everything else that you've agreed to do. So you can't just say, hey, we're going this way today.
Right. So my pivot started probably in 2017. So one of the buildings I did that came on the market in 2017 was the first all 4-bedroom condo building I'd ever done. No one had built 4-bedroom condos that I knew of maybe 100 years ago, but in my professional career, nobody had done it. So we did an all 4-bedroom building that did very well. And then the next building, we took that model and we amplified bits of it. Then in the next building, we amplified bits of it. So the amplifications can happen mid-market shift. So in the last amplification, we went from a 4-bed with an office that was undefined to a 4-bed with an office and a door, and from a 200 square foot outdoor space, which at the time was immense, to a 400 square foot office space, which was probably pandemic related. So we were able to make that modification, but we were already in the 4-bedroom space before the pandemic hit. And so this has been 7-8 years now of kind of defining a product type that we see more longevity with. But then when you talk about why is there no product, it would be pretty hard for me to pre-sell 100 units, a 100-unit building, a 4-bedroom product. Not impossible, but like you're looking for a pretty niche buyer who wants a house, who wants to stay somewhere, who sees themselves growing, sees themselves retiring, sees this kind of long-term stay in a place. And that group of buyers, they don't necessarily move that fast, especially the empty nester buyers. They have no urgency whatsoever.
Fair statement.
And truly, there's a lot of money there. Those people can buy the types of things in this market that are very expensive, but there's no urgency for them to buy today. Why would somebody coming out of a house feel the need to buy something pre-development, pre-construction that's not going to deliver for 2 years? There's no push for them. And so just the dynamics of having to pre-sell, it really comes back to pre-sales, but the dynamics of having to pre-sale big projects, 30, 40, possibly 50% for bank loan, really, really, really hard.
No, and that makes perfect sense. And now just to kind of put a couple of your projects out there, right? We've got Peoria Green, we've got Madison Carpenter, we've got the Hamptons buildings. I know there were 2 of those.
Yep.
You tend to work in a certain realm where your confidence is. And I think this really touches on the base of what you're talking about in terms of the pre-selling.
Yeah.
If I were then to twist the question, and I think I know the answer, but let's tell the consumers, why don't we see more entry-level new construction inventory?
Well, okay. So that comes back to a different aspect of the market, which is where costs have gone. So despite there not being prolific condo development in the last 15 years, the prolific apartment development has driven up the cost of land. So everybody before the pandemic or before this year thought that they owned a golden piece of property for a high-rise rental building. So if I said to them, hey, I want to do a 15-unit boutique condo, that doesn't work. I can't pay as much for that land as the guy doing a 400-unit apartment building. So all of this gets back to why are there not more entry level? Because nobody's paying $700 a square foot for a 1-bed. It hasn't existed until only one building I can think of recently in the West Loop, the Embry, where they succeeded and defied what I thought was the logic with very large, very expensive 2-bedroom product. It didn't necessarily make sense to me when I saw it brought to market, sure, but they sold out of that product. And that was $1 million plus 2-bedroom product, which has never happened in the city before.
Well, you could say the same is true for 2550, right? When 2550 broke away, and that was right at a terrible time with regards to the housing crisis, they put numbers out there, the price per square foot that we all said, you're crazy.
Yeah. The difference is that project spanned the recession. It started pre-recession. It got caught in the recession. And I don't know if it was actually a financial success. The Embry, which is not my product, and so I'm giving a plug for somebody else, and I will give that sales team a phenomenal amount of credit. They actually have achieved something in the time allotted that they anticipated, which I think is really interesting. But that's the only time that someone's brought that product to market, which is a product type, a 2-bedroom type. But now what you're talking about, it's not the entry level. Nope. This is potentially an empty nester. So for me to bring a 800 square foot 1-bed to market for $600,000 or $700,000, I don't know that anyone's buying that. Like that, sure, that buyer isn't out there.
It's a smaller market for certain.
I think it's a zero market is my concern. Certainly it's not a market of scale. And so the purpose of doing a big building with a lot of small units is scale. Well, when there's no pool for scale, the economics don't work.
No, and I think that that's a great point. And I think that that is a huge discussion point in the sense that this is your business. The decisions have to be profitable, or at least the hope is that they're profitable, and that some of the decisions, even the ones that might help the market, aren't going to necessarily keep you in the business that you want to be in. Correct.
And Peoria Green is a really interesting project when and I bring it up for a reason. When we started that building, the building had 2 sides. One side faced west towards Mary Broadway Park. We had single floor, 4,000 square foot units that were very expensive. And the other side of the building was the first 4 beds, more tightly designed spaces, 2,000 plus square foot, 4 beds. that we thought would fly off the market, and they didn't. And we ended up combining 3 sets of units on the other side, the non-premier side, into gigantic units at the same price point as the premier side. And we sold them all out, which is another pivot. So this is where I sometimes pivot. And we're looking at this now. We've got a building going up now where we've seen some interest in the combination of units. So 4,000 square foot plus units at $2 million plus price point in a neighborhood that historically hasn't had that available, or there hasn't been the demand. And so this is the weirdness of this market, is that buyer profile who's looking for bigger long-term has been way more active than the first-time buyer who doesn't really exist. Unless I'm mistaken, because you're in the general broker world, they're not out there.
I disagree in the sense that I think that there's definitely a market out there for more new construction entry level, but I absolutely agree with you that with the rising costs of dirt and labor and supplies, that all of a sudden your profit margins get squished when trying to sell to that entry level.
In today, in particular, interest rates. Yep. So you take those first 2 things, which already made it more expensive, which is what drives it into your $600, $700, $800 square foot price. And then you add an interest rate that's double what it was 24 months ago. It doesn't work.
Sure. No, I understand that, which is why so many of the developers that I know have said, hey, we're going to sit back. It doesn't make sense for us to build right now because there's no financial incentive. We're going to wait until the interest rates get better, the land gets a little bit, whatever the case may be, making it more profitable to them.
True.
One of the things that I've really appreciated about your work is that I know that there's sometimes 2 different sectors of where you're going. I love what I think you have called before your passion projects, where you're taking a little bit more of a older historical building. I feel like the current one you have going on right now is the Boniface Church. Can you talk to us a little bit more about those projects?
Yeah. So St. Boniface was a church church building that had been zoned prior to my involvement. So I grabbed the opportunity to take something on that had this super cool history. It's a church. It was already zoned, which, as we've talked about, is a difficult process in the city. So there was a natural kind of point to step into something. And then it's got this incredible setting on Eckerd Park. So you got this church that's south facing towards the city skyline, which I've learned that views matter to people a lot. And then it sits on a park. And I was like, I can make this work. So we're about 60 days away from delivering the first units there. We've just got a couple left.
I would say you're almost sold out on that one.
We are. We have 15 of 18 sold.
But then you're building another building next door.
Next door. So the property came with the site of the old parochial school, which was, again, zoned for residential. So we're doing 20 units there. We're under construction. We won't deliver for close to 12 months, towards the end of this year, I think. Those are the similar style 3 and 4 bedroom condos, but under construction already. So yeah, we take on these projects that are a little challenging, a little different. Fundamentally, more people are interested in something they don't feel is cookie cutter. So the ability to bring something that's got a little bit of a different sensibility, a different aesthetic, a different character is meaningful, because everyone feels like most other stuff is fairly cookie cutter. And so
it's kind of like going into the sentiment that most people think that all new construction looks the same.
Correct. So it's really hard to differentiate yourself with new. We can only do so much. There aren't that many levers to pull. But when you get into something old or adaptive reuse or some other thing, there are a few things you can bring to life that I think, seem to resonate with
If
people.
I remember correctly, when we originally walked through the state building, when it was in a very rough condition, I believe you were saying you were trying to figure out a way to restore the staircase.
Yeah.
Because you wanted to keep that as a core component of the home.
And haven't finished it yet. But the units are getting further along. But yeah, no, it was that. We spent well in excess of $200,000 restoring just the front of the building. And there are parts and pieces to that had to be preserved. I'm not a historicist. It's not my aesthetic. If you look at my repertoire of work, most is really forward-facing, really modern. But there, you had to respect that, and you had to bring it back to life and let it be what it needed to be. And it wasn't about the last dollar. We spent $20,000. We hired this amazing guy who recarved by hand the arch over the front door. It was like an incredible experience to watch this guy on site, literally recreating the stuff.
Like a true artist in his craft.
I'm not going to get paid for that, but it was the right thing to do. And so sometimes, at least you get to a point in your career, I hope I'm there, where occasionally you can do something that's not about money. It is a little bit about passion. The church is a killer project, the most complicated thing I've ever done, but it's really interesting.
No, and that's, I will say, one of the things that I've always respected so much about you and your work is that, yes, at the end of the day, it's got to try to make sense. But I've always appreciated the fact that that part of you, it's not just the tough exterior that you put out there, but you actually are trying to put something better out there, right? There is a true commitment to that.
We spend a lot of time thinking about how people live and how the spaces function. I care a lot about space. I'm personally much better at space planning than I am about exterior. I care what things look like, but I care that they live well. And like we spend a lot of time. And what kills me is most projects midstream, we end up doing a bit of a redo. We're like, this unit doesn't work, we got to redo it. And it is extraordinarily painful and expensive, but I'm willing to let the process play out because ultimately it's yielded a better result every time we've done it. It's horrible, but you have to listen to the market too. When the market says to you, this is a dog, you got to listen. I
understand. I think that's a great point. Let's pivot a little bit. Looking towards the new year, we are in 2024. What do you see as coming in new construction? What are you personally looking to do? What neighborhoods do you think are going to be hot?
God, I wish I knew all the answers.
These are
to
crystal
that.
Ball questions. I admit that.
No, so I mean, I'll tell you what I'm seeing. So the Gold Coast, the upper end of the Gold Coast, is interesting. There's need there. There's nothing available, and we talked about the single family and row home product that's there, some of which is very large, some of which is very grand, but that doesn't seem to be moving. Yet my very large, very expensive condos have sold. They address some of the issues. We have parking, we have outdoor space. That neighborhood hasn't historically had that. So we hit on something there. I think there's depth in that market still. The West Loop probably still has depth. I got more calls on Madison and Carpenter when I was sold out and not advertising and not on the MLS than I did on projects I was actively advertising. Some of what we aimed to do that was at the next level price point down for Madison Carpenter, that buyer who was targeted at $1 million with a 4% interest rate, they're really getting stuck now because they can't afford what I designed to sell to them because it wasn't done. We've lost the interest rate piece. And so their buying power isn't there. I mentioned to you that I think Hyde Park is interesting. We're exploring some stuff down there. I think there's pent up demand there, but I have made a habit out of staying core for the last several years. And not straying too far. Do you think we're going to start to see some more housing starts in the new year, especially from the townhome and condo range? I mean, I know a lot of this stuff gets planned a year or two ago. So no, I don't expect a lot. Okay. I've heard every developer I know who's a developer of scale, most bigger than me, are working on projects outside Chicago. And that's been a trend that's been going on for years. But all of the people I talk to are out of Chicago. In various different markets, mostly doing rental, a couple doing for sale. And so I don't know of a lot of projects being talked about in the city, and certainly nothing of scale, because the scale stuff between the zoning process, the neighborhood stuff, the city processes, the financing piece, it's really, really hard. Yep. On that realm, do you think that we'll continue to see some level of push towards the rental aspect, or you think that phase is a little bit tiered out? Well, Chicago this year was the 4th best performing city on absorption of newly delivered rental product. We don't tend to fare in the top 10 of much of anything when it comes to reports. So it's notable. And Chicago still has this huge concentration of educated young people downtown. And so Chicago's really a tale of two cities. You have the core, which behaves radically differently than the city in totality. So when they talk about population loss, it's not necessarily downtown, it's the population as a whole. So on the rental, I mean, there's almost no new product being planned for delivery in 2025. There's a cliff. Like we fall off a cliff because of the pandemic, because of interest rates, because of construction, because of zoning. There's a cliff. So there's a really unknown after 2024, and my crystal ball's foggy.
Okay, so one last question, and I'm going to admit in advance it's a little unfair, but since I tell you it's unfair, it's okay for me to ask.
No problem.
You have had a long history in this industry with ZSD Development, and prior to that, you affiliated and did quite a bit of work with Belgravia as well, a very reputable builder. What do you attribute your success to? Because your projects, especially in the latter half of your career, do tremendously well. What's your secret sauce?
There's a certain amount of repetitiveness to what we do. So you got to kind of hone your craft a little bit. I haven't deviated in product type, in really a lot in construction type, and certainly not in market. So I have really only ever built new construction for sale housing, and I've been doing the same thing for a long time. And so at some point, my mother used to say to me, you become an expert in something after 10 years. So I've developed a certain expertise, and with that comes a certain like gut instinct, and my gut instincts have gotten a little looser and more fluid over the years. But in all truth, it's just kind of doing the same thing and trying to be, it's a cumulative process. You really have to learn from what you did the last time. Try not to make the same mistake twice, which we've done. But as I said, the kind of evolution from the Hamptons, which was the first 4-bed product we did, to Peoria Green, to Madison, you can watch the evolution of the product type and the response to the market. That's how you get better. That's how you get good.
No, and I love that because I think there's so much truth in that. You hit on 2 points that really resonate with myself. Number one, I think for us all to get great at whatever our craft is, it is a consistency that most people do not have the ability to really do, right? It is not about being awesome at something. It's about being great at something and being able to do that again and again and again and again. And that's where most people fall short. So kudos to you to have that tenacity and that consistency in it. I know some days are more trying than others. The other thing that I think you said in there that I talk a ton about here, especially because of my environment growing up, I grew up in an area where there was this pressure of perfection, right? We all were taught that you do not fail, you do not make mistakes. That is a weakness that if you do, nobody sees. But I think that there's so much truth in the sense that in your line of work, in my line of work, in life in general, the more times we fall down, the more times we truly understand how we get better, wiser, and we do it smarter the next time.
Yeah, there's some cliche to it, but I made a $300,000 mistake on a project in 2006. And the person I work for, it was at Belgravia, the person I work for said to me, didn't say you're fired. He said, you'll never make that mistake again. And it stuck with me. It's, 17, 18 years later, I still remember what it was. I've never made the same mistake twice. It happens. It's partly how you learn. I don't yell at people when they make mistakes. I just implore them not to do the same thing again. But it happens. But that's also how you learn. And sometimes you screw up so badly and then you're like, oh, that was really interesting. And you can't anticipate everything. That's what I say. Like, we redesign units. It's painful, but that's what we do. Sure. And that's not so much looked at as a mistake. It's we put our best foot forward. It didn't work. And then you have to have the wherewithal to be able to pivot and say, okay, I'm going to try something else. And I've got to succeed. I have to find a path to success. And the only way is to keep trying. Nothing just comes. Nothing just happens.
Zev, thank you so much for being here. This has been an absolute pleasure. I appreciate being able to share you with everyone else. You and I have a lot of these great conversations from time to time. I have a tremendous amount of respect for you.
Thank you.
Which is not something that I say for a lot of developers in our realm. So I just really greatly appreciate it.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.